There's amazing software developers all over the world, but if you don't know how to manage them and work with them, it can cause a lot of problems. On today's episode of Product Driven, we're talking with Oshri Cohen, who works as a fractional CTO, and he has years and years of experience of working with developers from all over the world. It's a very insightful conversation you want to tune into today. To survive and thrive, you must adopt a product-driven mindset. And we're back for another episode of the Product Driven podcast. Today, I'm with Oshri Cohen, who is a fractional CTO, helps companies of all shapes and sizes figure out what their biggest challenges are. And before we hit record here, he was telling me he spent 90% of his time helping companies deal with outsourcing and offshoring and the challenges. And I think we're going to have a really fun conversation today about how to manage development teams, especially development teams that are remote, global, from different countries, different cultures. And of course, at full scale, I have a lot of experience with this. I have 300 employees in the Philippines, and I understand the strengths of their culture and some of the challenges of their culture. So I think it's going to be a very fun conversation. Oshri, welcome to the show, man.
I feel very welcome. Is this my second time? No, this is on the we had another one on your other podcast. I think I remember.
Yes. Yes. Yep. The Startup Hustle podcast is still alive. There's 1,300 episodes of it, but yeah, we got a new
Oh,
podcast, Product Driven. We're focusing more on software, engineering, product related stuff, and you're the perfect guy to be here today and tell us about like how do we manage developers from another country. And you wrote a very insightful LinkedIn post a couple weeks ago, which got my attention. And where do we start here? What is your first reaction of like, man, I've got to manage people across different countries and there's different nuances to that. Like, where do we start?
usually, usually the problem is they don't have any technical leadership. That's usually the first thing, especially with smaller companies, right? Smaller companies that hire a bunch of developers outsourced, whether it's Colombia, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan. I've worked with developers from almost all of the Middle East, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Latin, and Canadian developers once. I'm in Canada and I've very rarely worked with Canadian developers. Don't ask, it is what it is, right? Um, and the main problems that I've noticed are A, yes, there's technical leadership. There's no manager on location to actually help them, to guide them through their challenges and make sure they actually do the work, right?
Well,
And
and when
then
you
and they do it properly. Yeah.
I want to talk about leadership for a second because in my head, when I think of engineering leadership, I think of there as being three components. You have strategic, you have
Hmm.
operations, which is like people and process management, and then you have technical, like true technical leadership.
Hmm.
And some people are good at one or two of those things. I think it's super rare to get somebody who's good at all three of them. And so it depends on the kind of the managers you have in house, right? So if you're good at all three, you're Oshri and you're a fractional CTO, but you're probably weaker at one of them, I would imagine. But
Yeah.
some people are super strategic. They're good at managing teams, but they may not be the most technical person, right? Like maybe they used to be a long time ago, but now they've been in management a long time. So point being, like engineering leadership is kind of this triangle of the different three, and then
Mm.
product is kind of its own different beast of knowing how to build a good product. So when you say they're lacking engineering leadership, which of those is usually the problem? Is it technical leadership, like how are we going to architect this thing, or is it more people and process of like how do I delegate this, how do I support them, how do I mentor them, how do I coach them, like, or is it all of it?
It's actually all of it. It's actually, and that's why this problem is so difficult to solve, right? That's why so many companies are wasting so much money with outsourcing, and you see what 75-80% of projects fail because they're missing it across the board. Now, if you expect a fish to climb a tree, you're gonna fail miserably. I mean, you can whip the fish at the tree, maybe it'll get stuck on a branch, and that's as far as it goes, right? And so one of the first mistakes that a lot of clients do, and especially when they don't hire very professional outsourcing companies like Full Stack or Full Scale, sorry, Full Scale, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
Full Scale. Okay. Which, by the way, we need to talk about a couple of developers later. Um, like Full Scale. Um, is that they expect them to also do the architecture and the and the solution design and so on. And very few are capable of doing that, especially if you're hiring maybe just one or two developers or you're hiring a small dev shop. You know, they say you saw an ad out there, they're the cheapest in the world, $15 an hour, whatever it is. It's great, or they'll build you your mobile app for 5K, whatever it is. If you expect them to also architect the system properly and do the solution design, you are in for a treat. Well, you're not in for a treat, you're in for a headache, right? I'm in for a treat because you're going to call me afterwards to fix the problem. And so it's a lot of the problems that I've noticed is due to misaligned expectations. I expect you to do this because I'm hiring a developer and all developers need to be able to do this, right? Obviously. Nope, that's not the case. That is not how it works at all, right? You know just as well as any other. You put a couple of junior developers in a room, they can design something, but it's not going to be what one senior developer can put in together that's seen things after 20 years. So, problem number
Let
one
me
is that. Yeah.
so here's another way that I like to describe this. I describe it, it's also the difference between like defined work and undefined work, right? It's like how much of the like gray area can you deal with? Now
Mhm.
you and I could be parachuted probably into any company in the world, and we could figure out what are we going to do, how are we going to do it. You and I would come up with the right questions. We would somehow figure it all out, and we'd say, hey, this is how we're going to build this thing. I know how to architect it. Let's go, right? 90% of people can't do that, right? Like you have to define the work for them.
Yeah.
And the more undefined the work is, the more difficult it is to outsource or offshore or hire an entry level developer or a junior level developer, right? Like it, back to the leadership, I always look at it, it's like, how well have you defined the work? How well do you understand what needs to be done? Because if you're not even sure what needs to be done, like why are you actually even hiring a developer potentially? Or you need to hire a consultant or somebody like Oshri here to come in and help you figure out what needs to be done. And yeah, you may have to pay you $200 or $300 an hour or something, right? Like some kind of consultant to come in and help do that versus hiring the offshore developer and you pay them 20, 40, $50 an hour, right? Like there's a huge disparity, but that's why you need both. You need the
Mhm.
consultant, you need the fractional CTO to come in and figure out, are we building the right thing? Are we going to build it the right way? And have that mixed into helping manage these projects and run the teams.
Exactly what you said. Yes, 100%. 100%. Because again, misaligned expectations. If you expect an outsourcing team of developers, and some may be fantastic. You might find a gem out there. There are senior developers. They've seen things. Even junior developers. I've seen junior developers design beautiful things because they saw, or the last project was excellent, and you just struck gold. Excellent. They'll advise you properly. Great. But
We
that is
have some of those
very
guys too.
right. You meet one and you tell yourself you're going to be a principal in 5 years because you need raw experience. I love these guys. Finding that kind of talent is actually very exciting. But I digress. So it goes to misaligned expectation. If you expect them to advise you and design a solution for you, and you don't even know how solutions need to be designed, what is it? It's like, I like to use the analogy of building a house. You're going to get a house built. You're not hiring the architect. You're not hiring an interior designer. You're not even hiring an engineer. You're hiring a handyman, and some handymen are fantastic. My father's a handyman. I almost went into that business instead of software development as a child and or as a young adult. And you expect them to build you a Miami style house, with floor to ceiling glass windows and a patio and everything. You're in for a bit of a surprise because they probably don't
No,
even
the
know the
door is
building
closed
codes.
right. The floor is not
Nothing closes the
level.
door. It's like everything's like just
Light
it
switches
looks
turn off
kind of
random things in the
okay.
house.
Yeah, but light switch flushes the toilet. You're like, how? Don't ask. Listen, it is what it is. It's happened before, you
Yeah.
know? So so that's the reality with outsourcing, and that's the most dangerous thing with outsourcing. Now, if you do know what it is that you want to build, excellent. Great. You're already better than 99% of the clients out there. You actually know what you want to build. Oh, I want to build a mobile app and I want to this and I've got UX mockups and I've got business requirements and flow diagrams and user stories and journey maps and everything. Great. Then you're already fantastic. But now almost anyone can build this. Any developer out there can build it. The issue is, how are they going to build it now? That's the key. That's
Well,
the key.
so we touched on the engineering leadership and why that's important. We touched on the importance of knowing like what you're going to build, like having hopefully somebody with a strong product vision, a product team, a business analyst, architecture, getting all the basis of it right
Mhm.
before you feed it to the team. But there's one other important thing that I hear all the time is a lot of companies actually may have an engineering leader in house. They have a lead developer, a head of engineering, whatever the title is. But here's the problem I hear all the time, and I bet you hear the same thing. He'd be like, hey, we hired these couple offshore developers, even hired them with via full scale. They're great developers, whatever. Problem is, I go to my head of engineering and I say, what are those two guys doing? And they're like, well, I don't have time to manage them, right? Like, how often do you run into that? It's like, hey, you have in-house leadership, but really what you have is in-house like individual contributor. You have the guy who like wants to be the hero and
Mhm.
doesn't want to delegate to other people. Now, I understand that if you've hired like two developers in India, Pakistan, Philippines, whatever, wherever they are,
Yeah.
and they're terrible, like I get it. Like if I was that engineer, like I hate working with these people. I ask them to do something, they do a terrible job. I have to redo their work. Like I would first just ask, well, why didn't you get rid of those people? Like they suck.
Yeah. First of all,
But
why are you keeping them on board?
yeah,
Get rid
but
of
the
them,
bigger
first of all.
problem is that is actually never going to work anyways. Even if you hire two amazing developers from India, wherever it is, it's never going to work if you don't have that person internally that is good at delegating the work and actually
Mhm.
helping manage other people. How often do you run into that?
All the time. And the problem is A, communication, A, leadership, management, all of that business. But it's an interesting problem because it goes back down to how the system was designed, how it's architected. Because either if you have internal, technical leadership, you got a tech lead, a senior developer, a CTO, whatever it is, and they're great at their job, they're excellent. This is what they can do, right? And they're excellent. If that's what you've got, but you're asking your offshore developers to do incredibly complicated architectural level work, right? Because that architecture is missing. You don't have a data engineering stack. You don't have
Missing some
a
foundation.
yeah, you don't have a cron job server. You don't have proper deployments. All of these things, they're going to struggle because 90% of the time they're working at hours that you are not working. You can't
Sure.
support them. So you need to create a system where you have repeatable processes. And I come into clients day in, day out, and I see exactly that. Oh, you have to build all of these things. And why did you do cron jobs? Why did you use a schedule job instead of a queue? Oh, we don't have one. Oh, well, why didn't you put one in? We didn't know we were allowed to. We didn't know we could, right? And that's where the cultural shift really
Yeah.
becomes a chasm. It's not like a misunderstanding. It's you're
It's a cultural
separated by continents. That's how complicated it is. Because depending on the culture, they might not be as forthcoming. That's the key, right?
So I
I've mentioned,
let's
yeah,
let's drill into that topic
yeah.
more. And as you've worked with people all over the world, and we know
Mhm.
some people are have like more direct communication, some are more indirect. Some are going to speak up, some like they're just going to they're like, Oshri, sir, tell me what you want to do, sir. I will ask nothing else. You just tell me what to do, sir. Like there's some people that are
Yeah.
like that, right? You've got people all over the board with different cultures and respect and class systems and different things that kind of, I don't want to say hold people back, but they kind of hold people back in regards to collaboration because they're not as
Yes.
forthcoming. They don't show as much ownership and leadership. Um, and I'm well aware of this because I have 300 employees. We've
Hmm.
worked with 200 clients, and our employees have varying degrees of these sorts of issues, and we work very hard internally to train on these issues. Like it's a big issue, it's a big thing for us to identify and train these. But so I'm curious, like, do you have any stories or insights from like the different countries you've worked with, and like,
Oh
oh,
my
this
gosh.
I think you said before on LinkedIn, like, oh, like developers in Poland, like they hate pull request comments or whatever, like weird
Yeah.
anecdotes of this kind of stuff.
So it's interesting. So I have three stories, right? Or three examples. I love working with developers out of the Middle East because they'll tell you your shit stinks, right? They'll tell you exactly what you need to hear and they will not hold back an opinion. I like it. They're very direct, but that's the communication style and the culture to begin with. I'm from the Middle East, so I totally get it. I understand it
I like it.
100%, right? I
Very
tell them
direct.
this, they're like, no, this is a stupid idea, straight up, right? Like don't use that kind of language. Very direct, but I like it. That's good. And that works. That works with the kind of with my leadership style, which is perfect. I've worked with development teams out of India, fantastically scaled. But if it is not written down and you don't ask them to tell you what they understood, it's not going to get done properly.
Okay.
And so this is where it really, really matters. You got to have that ticket laid out properly, structured, and it takes a hell of a long time to do so, right? That's the thing. So, but that's the culture. It's like because they don't ask questions, at least. And India is really big. I've worked with sections with areas in India. I mean, you can divide India in four, and it's four completely different
Sure.
countries
Yeah.
in terms of culture, completely
I mean,
different,
we're talking about
right?
stereotypical things that happen,
Yeah,
right? Like obviously,
stereotypical. So I don't mean to offend or any way like that or generalize, but that's the reality, right?
a lot of
You
it's
need it to be
culture.
very, very clear. Yeah, you need to be
It's culture. A
very,
lot of
very,
it.
very clear,
Yep.
right? And so they won't really ask questions. So you have to ask the questions for them, right? And say, hey, do you understand this aspect? What about this part? Do you get like this one line here? This is very, very important. So I've developed a way of writing the tickets. Like you must consider the following. Ta, 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 ta. Here's the risk. Ta, ta. It takes a long time, but ChatGPT is really good at that.
At that. Yeah.
You know, ChatGPT is really good at. I talk to it. I'm like, write me a Geo ticket for this. There you go. Thank you very much. It understood. Great. Be very direct and very specific about everything. Then you make a small change. You're good. Listen, you gotta use AI. This is where AI is really shines, right? And then I've had developers in Bangladesh, such sweet people, so smart, incredibly gifted, great developers, but deeply hierarchical. Do not talk to the dev directly. If they have a manager, you better go talk to the manager directly. They are very confused, right? I've worked with about 50 different developers from Bangladesh in various areas. They do not like to be spoken to directly. If they have a manager, speak to the manager. The manager will speak to them, right? Otherwise, it's not going to happen. And they won't tell you they're annoyed. They won't tell you. They won't tell you you just pissed them off. I learned that the hard way, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm used to like, I'm on Slack. I've got all my developers. You know what? I go in and if there's a PR review, I get on a call. I'm like, let's go and review this together. And they're like, okay. And they're just paying attention, paying attention, paying attention. But then they go and tell their boss, it's like, but they spoke to me directly. Yeah. So for me, what was the problem with that? But there, don't do that. Never. So it's
Okay.
very deeply, deeply hierarchical. I didn't,
Okay.
I wouldn't even assign tickets. I would let them, the manager, you assign tickets now going forward. Here's the order in which I need things done. Kanban works great over there. Great, great, great. Just pick up the next one, assign it, and so on and so
Okay.
forth. It works beautiful over there. Skilled or not, or
There's
where you
smart
come
people
from.
everywhere.
There's smart people everywhere.
It's
It's
more
just how
about
you use them.
culture. It's more
Can
about
you use
culture.
them effectively and can you communicate with them effectively?
Yeah.
So now, to give you to use the example you used previously, where you have a tech lead, it's hard to work with the developers, he doesn't like the work, and so on and so forth. You have to be smart about how you use your people. If I have a bunch of soldiers, foot soldiers, and I ask them to do some special forces level stuff, then they're gonna fail at it. That's not what they're trained for. So I'm gonna put them at specifically that. Go dig this ditch. This is what we need to do. Okay? Put in the architecture and say, hey, we've got 50 cron jobs that we need to write. Here you go. And that's how you do it. And you put it this way and you do your unit test this way. Go ahead and work now because it's very, very specific to the actual work itself. It's a unit of work. Just do that when you finish, commit, push, pull requests, all of that business. And that's as far as it goes, right? But you have to know who you're dealing with. And then you also have to know the class of work that you're going to assign to them. And that's really important, right? So I've had I've had outsourced developers that where I give them full re-architecture jobs. I'm like, I need this whole thing redesigned in one line, usually the Middle East. Great stuff. Boom. 2 weeks later, they come back. I haven't heard from you in 2 weeks. Is it done? Yeah, it's done. It's actually in production. I'm like, what do you mean? Next time you have me review the PR first, you know? My fault. I didn't
Yeah.
have branch protection that one time. That one time I didn't have branch protection. I came into the company like right in, we ran with it. But it happens. And it worked. It was fine. Like they did the job, right? Because I knew who I was dealing with. And that's the important bit, you know?
So you mentioned developers in Latin America. Is there something about them that is a particular thing you have to focus on?
They're very passionate, that's for sure.
Okay.
Very, very passionate. They're also direct, not as direct as the Middle East,
Okay.
right? They're also direct. Um, they, don't rip on a PR. Don't put in too many criticisms in the PR. But that's a general rule, right? Just in general, in PRs, don't be an arse about it, right? Just be polite
Nobody
in
likes
general.
public criticism.
Nobody likes public criticism. So what I do is if I notice a PR has more than one or two changes, I just get on a call with them. I'm like, here you go, let's do this. I'm not even gonna log this into the comments. Just this is what I need you to do, and we do a live PR review together, right? At least at the beginning, because at least until they know you, they know who you are, right? Well, I develop a relationship with my developers since I manage offshore teams for my clients. I develop a relationship. I know them for 6 months, 8 months, a year, sometimes two
Yeah.
years, right? I still have developers from 2 years ago that we're still working together every day for an hour. But at this point, it's like a half-hour meeting, 15-minute meeting. I know them, they know me, they know the standards, what needs to be done, and that's it. This is why the CTO job is actually kind of boring at some point. At some point, when everything's running fine, like, what do I do? Do I just tickets are fine, everything's prioritized, work is getting done, you
It means
know?
you're good at your job.
Yeah, that's it. Like I've worked myself out of a job. That's
Yeah.
that's what I do. I'm working myself. Usually it takes 10 months. That's from the point I get hired. It takes 10 months to work myself out of a job. That's what
So
it
we
usually takes.
we gave some nuanced examples of, different countries, different cultures, and some of it is like deep culture things. Like even in the Philippines, there's, they tend to like to work in groups. They don't want to, they're worried about when they post stuff of like what people are going to think about what they post and maybe criticism of what they post. And there's nuances to every culture, right? And not everybody has all of these same sort of characteristics, but they're stereotypically sort of true in a lot of cultures because it's just the culture, right? Like as Americans, we have certain stereotypes and sort of characteristics too, much like I'm sure even Canadians do, or whatever. But I think the key is just understanding them and also thinking about, probably more importantly, wherever you're from, how you are used to managing people is not going to work exactly the same as it does when you're working with people from other cultures, and you just have to kind of learn to understand. And I think a lot of sense you're never going to figure out unless you just do it, right? Like you've said, like I've managed developers in these different countries, and now because you have done it, you kind of know what to look out for, where to over communicate, where to ask more questions,
Mhm.
right? But like everything in life, you don't really learn these things until you kind of go through it.
You know, the measure of a real leader, there's plenty of managers out there. So managers, there are a dime a dozen. If you can be organized and you can answer your emails, you're a manager. You're good. You're fine, right? You can follow up and whatnot. Great. But the real measure of a leader is empathy. That's the thing. And you should be able to understand how a person is right from the get-go within a few conversations. You have to be able to understand it. You have to have the foresight to actually research and get a sense for it, right? So I was hiring developers out of Egypt, right? I knew nothing about Egypt. Nothing. I didn't know about the culture. I called a friend and I'm like, talk to me about your people. He happened to be from Egypt. Talk to me. Like just like what am I supposed to do? Say no, don't say, and so on. I did a little bit of research just to be prepared. For Bangladesh, I didn't know anybody. I even looked for a consultant. Nothing, zero. I couldn't find a communication consultant, a culture consultant, nothing. Right? So I made a couple of mistakes at that point, but you make the mistake once in your life and that's it, you know? So that's it. A leader needs to be able to spot it and see how their message is perceived, not just throw the content, not just throw data out there and hope it gets received, right? That's the thing. That's what makes it a really, really hard job as a leader. You are in charge of who they are, of not of who they are, but on how they receive the information as well. You're responsible how they receive it, not only how you send it, and also how they perceive it and understand it. You
Well,
have to
that's
make sure that the full flow of communication is done. And a Jira ticket is not communication.
I
Just copying in it.
yeah,
It's not
as you
communication.
describe this, and maybe you just said the word, but the thing that sticks out to me is, do they understand what I'm telling them? Right? I think that's the most important thing. Is, yeah,
Uh-huh.
empathy I think is super critical, and honestly, that's something I've struggled with in most of my life, even with my own children, and I've had to really work on.
Same
Because
here.
some of my children are very different personalities than the rest of them. So I think empathy is really good, but I think understanding the personality, right? Understanding, do I need to push them? Do I need to pull them? But I think more specifically, like when you're communicating with them about what work needs to be done, can you recognize that they understand it? Can you see in their face that they understand what I'm telling them to do, or do they look confused? Right? Like, do they understand? I think is the thing that I'm always concerned about. Do they understand what I asked them to do?
It's very hard to do remotely.
Yes.
You don't see the body language. You don't see me the way I'm sitting right now. You don't see that if am I fidgeting? It's like, oh, when you're communicating with people in person in the same room, you can sense someone not understanding. They can lie to you till tomorrow. You can sense just because humans have body language, call it telepathic capabilities, whatever it is, you can sense how whether someone understands it. And and the big problem in software development is that we have omitted communication for tickets and issue management. And we have all of these tools, plethora of tools to eliminate talking. Everything from, working in a document together, async PR reviews, all of these things, they take away from communication. And so at the beginning, when you first start with people, you talk a lot more because that's how you understand whether they will actually understand what it is that you're asking
Yeah.
them to do, right? And it does take time. It's not going to be right from the get-go immediately. It's going to take you a good month to understand. That's why, when we hire people, it takes a month, 2 months, 3 months to get a sense of whether they actually fit the company, right? Whether they're producing at the level that we need them to produce at and what we expect them to do and where there's skill gaps because you can interview till tomorrow. You're not going to catch these things until you start working with these individuals,
And this
right?
and this the same principle applies to all facets of life. Like even with my wife. Like if I say something to my wife, I usually know depending on the topic, like is she going to understand what I just told her? Or did I just totally confuse her and I'm gonna have to give her a lot more explanation, right? And same thing with my
Yeah.
kids. Like, if I tell my 4-year old something versus my 15-year old something and what we're talking about. And so the same sort of concept applies in our professional life. When you're dealing with your employees, much like you, it's like I've had employees I've worked with for many years. I know what I can tell them and I already know what they're thinking and I know that they understand what I'm talking about and they're going to go take care of the thing versus like somebody new, you're like, I have no idea if they understand what I just told them and what they're supposed to do, right?
You
And
know, I sent my wife a Jira ticket once and it did not work very well. I was like, did you assign me work? I'm kidding, but that it doesn't work very well. It's yeah, at the relationship you have with an outsourcing team at the beginning of when you start working with them is very different than how you have it middle and towards the end.
yeah,
Now, it also matters. Your communication style changes based on whether it's a mandated project with an end or it's staff augmentation. I'm augmenting you to be part of my team for the next few years. That's what
yeah.
I need, right? I like them. The price is good. The skill is there. Trust me, I'd rather hire senior developers from your company, then go and hire senior developers in the United States or in Canada because I know I'm going to get fantastic skills, but I won't have to pay $200,000 a year,
Right.
right?
Yep.
And unfortunately, that's the situation for many businesses, right? It's just, you know, FANG has messed up our salaries. In North America, developer just paid way too much, you know,
Yeah.
way, way, way too much. And that's the rise of outsourcing. So how you communicate with them matters based on whether it's an open-ended uh, staff augmentation, which means there's more. Let me understand you. Let me learn who you are. Let's develop a
A
relationship.
long-term team.
Yeah, let's have coffee together. Let's have
Yeah.
coffee together for no
And
reason,
that's what we do at full scale. We only do staff
right?
augmentation. And that's a big difference of why outsourcing fails, right? And what I always give people the analogy of like it makes sense if you're doing a project like, oh, I need to build a WordPress plugin. Like, I don't need a developer for the next 5 years to manage this WordPress plugin. I found some random person on Upwork. They
Mm.
did it. They gave me the code.
Oh, Upwork.
I can hopefully figure out how to maintain this weird little thing that they did.
Yeah.
And that's different. You're like, I don't even care who did it. I just need them to make it work. Is totally different than like, I need a team member that's going to be around here for a long time. I need their tribal knowledge, them to be part of the team, them to feel like they're winning or losing with us as a team and like
Hmm.
bleeding with us, right? Like that's the difference. And that's why staff augmentation works so much better.
Yes, I 100% agree with that. I 100%. I prefer staff augmentation over anything else, right? If there's the work to do, if there's enough work to be done, right? If there's
Yeah,
enough work to be done. But yes, that's the key. However, I would always, always, always recommend that the client have in-house technical leadership
totally agree.
from the technical intellectual property, the architecture, the solution design has to be in-house because solution design and leadership are very, very closely tied to business value. What is it that you're trying to get? What is it that you're trying to build? Right? I've seen, and I'm sure you have seen some crazy things being built based on a one-liner request. Oh, we need to export this report as an Excel file, and they do it completely way off. It doesn't matter. They did the job technically.
Right.
It does return. It crashes the server, but you didn't tell them not to crash the server. That's what you didn't tell them to. You know, you had to be very
I,
specific about that part too. But I digress. You know, so
I think the other key here is, especially if you're a non-technical founder, business owner, or a very small company, you've got to have somebody you can trust. I'm
Mhm.
sitting here emailing this morning with a lady from Kansas City who she has one developer from Pakistan that she's been working with, and she's had nothing but problems. He's like doesn't show up to meetings. The software they built has been down. Like she has no trust in his ability, like going forward to deliver where it's
Mhm.
like totally like put her out of business almost. She's like, I can't function. Like I can't even do this. And then now what does she do? Like this person sort of holds her hostage. Like they have the code, they have access to everything. Like that's a whole nother challenge. And ultimately it's about trust, right? And that's why they need a company like Full Scale that they can trust. Or like, hey, I know Matt, I can always contact you and say, no matter what's going on, like you're gonna help me figure out what is going on, and we can figure out and do things the right way. Or having somebody like you, Oshri, right, that comes in and says, hey, we're going to ensure this can't happen. We're going to ensure you have access to Azure, you have access to the source code, all
Yeah,
this kind
just
of stuff,
foundational
foundational stuff.
just build just the foundational stuff. Who has access to this? This Amazon was created with a Gmail account. I'm sorry, what? No,
Yeah.
that's okay. Let's go fix this. Who's the owner? The developer. Oh, Lord, help me. I actually had that. I actually had that situation at some point. Client calls me and we don't have the source code for this. I'm like, how do you lose source code? I had to
Yeah.
hunt for it. They actually did in fact lose the source code because they had a self-hosted Git server, right? Because why not? You know, and they had shut down the machine. It was on Azure, and they just killed it. And they lost all the source code, and the
These
developer was
wild
no
things
longer
happen, man.
available and whatnot. Man, it's a crazy industry that we are in. It's an absolutely nutsos industry that we are in because it's so completely unregulated and there are no standards. There's no ISO standards for software
Right.
development.
And you're
There
dealing
isn't
with intellectual
anything.
property, confidential
Yeah,
data, security,
right. And
all
everybody
those things.
thinks a developer is a developer when you need an architect and an engineer and you're getting a handyman and you think the handyman can do all of this, and it's not the
Yeah.
case. That is not the situation. They're skilled at what they do. But if you ask them to, you know, handyman to build you a skyscraper, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
you're
it's the
in
wrong
for
guy.
a serious treat. I'll tell you that
Yep.
much, right?
Well,
And and what bugs me is that you have these very skilled business folks, right? Very smart founders that are making these very rudimentary mistakes. We're not talking about people that don't know anything about business. Like, we're talking about seriously smart individuals, successful in their lives, successful in business, but when it comes to the technology, they're technologically stupid. Not a negative thing. This knowledge doesn't exist, right? Mobile development started 15 years ago, cross-platform mobile development 10 years ago, you know, and now we've got new technologies from 5 years ago and then 2 years ago. I mean, it's evolving so quickly. They don't know. They just don't know what to do or how to do it. So they're at the mercy. I think everyone should have a fractional CTO personally, but I'm not biased in any way, shape, or form.
hey, even Patrick Mahomes as a coach, everybody needs a coach. Everybody
Eh,
needs somebody that they can learn from.
coaching is 99% of what I do. Once I put in the foundation and a management strategy, this is how we manage tasks. This is how we go through it. Once you put in, this is how we deploy code. We don't need the CTO doesn't need to be involved. Nobody needs to click and update a database, right? This is it's just done for you because we put a system in place, and it really doesn't take that long to do it right. We're talking about the cost differential of doing it right versus doing it bad. It's 10%. It doesn't cost a lot to put in, a cron job server or a data engineering stack. It's just click, click, it's done. That's it.
I
Just
I love the quote of like people never think they have the budget to do things the right way, but they figure out the budget to do it like twice.
twice, 3 times, 4 times. I'm dealing with one client like that right now. They just fired their CTO as well, right? They spent $150,000 USD. The guy brought in developers and this and that, produced nothing. Never bothered to ask what the requirements were. I'm like, oh, okay, this is ridiculous. Let's just forget about all of this and fix it, you know?
Well, I really appreciate you having you on the Product Driven show today. Just kind of recap, I think there were five key takeaways that I heard about managing offshore. You've got to have in-house leadership, strategic, operational, technical, all those really matter. You got to know what to build. You got to have a product vision, product direction, requirements. You've got to understand all that. You've got
Hmm.
to have defined work. Like you can't have null people delegating null work to null developers, right? Like you've got to
Hmm.
know all these things. Um, Architecture matters. Having the building blocks, I think, was a good tidbit too. Of like you got to have the building blocks so the team can do things.
Just make
Um,
it repeatable work. What's the
yep.
repeatable process? Software development is not that complicated. We're
If
just moving data from point A to point B.
most of the
That's
time,
it. That's a
yep.
100% of our work. That is it. That's all there is, right? There's the
Unless you're
nuances there.
catching rocket boosters, but even
Even
that's
then,
data, I guess.
they're sending data from one server
Coordinates.
to another machine that moves an arm. They're
Yeah,
moving data. That's it.
moving
That's
data
100%
around.
of our work. How it impacts the world is irrelevant. You
And then
know?
we also talked a lot about culture and just understanding the people you're working with, and examples where some like they want everything written. Some people that you got to talk to the manager, or like just different weird cultural things you got to understand. And the tidbits there we talked about is really just understand having empathy for that, having empathy that people work differently than you, and that having empathy that their culture is different, right? And the key is you want to
Hmm.
make sure they understand what you're telling them to do. And by the way, my favorite tidbit for that is I think you can realize that based on the questions that the developers ask. And the developers don't ask any questions. Like you tell them something to do, they don't ask a single question. I assume they have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah,
If
basically.
they ask questions, you can tell very quickly where their brain is. They're like, oh, they really get it. Like that's a really insightful question, or are they asking like really basic questions because they probably don't understand? So that's one of my favorite tidbits is the questions that they ask.
And so if I may add a little bit more on that, because that's a really interesting thing you just mentioned, right? I hope we still have time. But is just because they're not asking questions may not mean they don't understand. Culturally, they may not feel like they're allowed to ask the question. And that's really important.
Yeah.
That's what we really have to understand, right? Because they may not ask because culturally they're not supposed to challenge their manager.
Yep.
That's
That's
just
something that we heavily train on at Full
deeply
Scale.
hierarchical, right? I don't know. In your developers are from where? Philippines?
Philippines. Yep.
Philippines. Like, what's the culture over there? Is it deeply hierarchical? Are people very enterprising and they take life by the horns? What is it?
I don't know if I would describe it as hierarchy as much as it is respect. It's more based on respect, and they
There you
want to be
go.
respectful. It's similar to hierarchy, but it's more about respect. They want to be respectful to other people and even their teammates. And so they're trying to keep harmony with the team, and they don't want to do anything that's going to like cause commotion. But sometimes they need to. They need to step up and be like, "This is a terrible idea, and this is why." Like, and ask
So
the
what
questions. Like we gotta train them to do that too.
so what I do is and a proven method, and it's worked across cultures, right? So far, for me, it's worked across cultures, is I take responsibility for their decisions. I'm like, tell me what do you want to tell me? I'm going to take responsibility. There's no stupid idea. Just tell
Yeah.
me. What do you think? If we go with it, it's my decision to go with it, but it is your idea. If it works out, you get credit. If it fails, I take the risk. It's all upside to you. So you got to liberate and remove all of the anxiety and stressors and say, oh, well, hold on a minute. This is interesting, right? Suddenly they're free to talk. It doesn't happen immediately. It takes a little bit of time. They have to trust you. They have to trust who you are. You're just some 2D image that they've never met before. And then what, you just start barking orders? It doesn't work this way, right? I have a meeting with my developers first for an hour, 2 hours. We talk shop, we talk tech, we talk this, get to know each other. That's a very, very important aspect, right? But I want to finish, if we're finished, but I want to finish with one last very important note. It's not only about understanding the culture, it is about respecting their culture.
Yes.
In my calendar,
You're absolutely
I
right.
have the holidays for Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, Egypt, Lebanon, right?
You got the
Israel.
whole year blocked off.
I've got everything. Like it's every color of the rainbow. I've got it all.
Yeah,
Because
you
you
got
know
the
what?
whole year blocked off.
Because you know what, in the morning or at midnight I have, I was at some point managing developers out of Egypt and the Gaza Strip, and it was a fast, it was Ramadan, right? And it was towards the
Yeah.
end of Ramadan, it was Eid. So you know what, around midnight I reminded myself to send them a message and say, hey, you know whatever. I don't remember what I said, Eid Mubarak or whatever it is. They have a lot of fasts like that. So, so I sent them a message because you know what? I want to make sure that they understand that as their leader, I understand their culture. I get it 100%, right? You know, that's an important
But
aspect.
you also want to respect it. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, you respect their culture, respect who they are. If there's a holiday, hey, what about this holiday? You're off on that holiday because it's coming up. Great, excellent. What are you doing with your family? This, that. Tell me about it. I want to know
Yeah.
how do you celebrate the holiday in
Which is
your
one of my
area?
favorite parts is
Oh,
learning
it's so
other
much
people's
fun.
culture. Yeah.
It's so much fun. It's so much fun because I'm a citizen of the world, right?
Yeah.
Like, so that's the funnest part. But if you do that and you develop a good relationship, you can't fail. I mean, you could. There's a lot of reasons you could fail, but at least you got that covered.
Well, once again, this was Oshri Cohen. Thank you so much for being on the show. If anybody needs a fractional CTO consultant of any kind, Oshri's your guy. Where can they learn more about you, Oshri, besides on LinkedIn, which we know you're
Uh,
uber famous
so
there?
on LinkedIn, I've got two domains as well. I've got redcorner.io, which is my agency. I've got oshricohen.me, which is my personal fractional CTO business as well. So a little bit of both, right?
Okay.
It's very hard to find. But trust me, there's not many Oshri Cohens. The only other one is a model out of Israel. I'm not the guy with a shirt on the horse. Clients have asked me, did I model before? Not because I'm good looking, but because they Googled my name and this guy shows up and it kind of looks like me, I think.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. I think it was a
Yeah,
great episode about, as you mentioned, understanding other people's cultures, but also
yeah.
respecting them. I think it was really good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.